You felt something shift in the field this week, not dramatically, not with a clear signal or a message or anything external you could point to. Just a change in the quality of his energy. Like something that had been pressing in one direction for a long time suddenly went quiet, or turned. Like the particular weight of his distance changed texture and became something else that you cannot quite name but can absolutely feel. That is not your imagination. Something happened inside him. Quietly, without announcement, probably without him fully understanding what was happening while it was happening. A door opened in a room he had been keeping locked for a long time, not because he chose to open it, because the lock gave way on its own, the way locks do when enough pressure has built up on the other side. He realized something, not in a way of arriving at a conclusion through careful thinking, in the way of something breaking through, the way a thing you have known beneath the surface for months suddenly becomes impossible to not know, the way the mind finally catches up to what the body and the soul have been carrying the whole time. He realized he pushed away something real. And that realization, the specific interior experience of a person who has spent months constructing reasons why the distance was logical and right and necessary, suddenly finding himself in direct contact with the truth underneath all of those reasons, is one of the most disorienting experiences a human nervous system can move through. That is what you are feeling in the field this week. If you have sensed a shift in his energy lately, something quieter, something that feels different from the ordinary distance, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop. I felt the shift in the comments. Because what happens inside him when cognitive dissonance finally collapses is not something most twin flame content describes accurately. And understanding it changes how you hold everything that comes after. Right now, before we go any further, I need to put something in front of you. Because if he is arriving at this realization, you are at a turning point in your journey that deserves more than general content. You deserve to understand the specific architecture of what the universe has been building between you. Your birth chart holds the blueprint of this connection in a way that no general video can reach. A twin flame union personal reading goes straight into that blueprint. Your name, your date of birth, your exact time of birth, your place of birth. Those 4 coordinates become the foundation of a reading built entirely around your journey and no one else's. What lands in your inbox is a personal audio reading and a full written report that maps where you are in your journey right now. What the universe is currently orchestrating in the space between you. What karmic patterns have been running underneath the surface. And what your soul contract with him actually means beneath everything either of you can see from inside the experience. If you are at a turning point and you want to understand what it means from the level where it is actually happening, the link is in the description. Now, let us go into what is actually happening inside him. For months, he has been living inside a structure he constructed himself. It is a psychological structure. A specific arrangement of beliefs, explanations, rationalizations, and selective attention that allowed him to maintain the distance while also maintaining his self-image as a person making reasonable decisions for understandable reasons. A person who is not running from something real. A person who is not afraid. A person who left because leaving was the right call, not because staying felt like too much to hold. This structure did not appear all at once. It was built incrementally, the way most psychological defenses are built, one layer at a time, each layer added in response to a specific moment where the truth threatened to become too visible to look at directly. The first layer was probably a version of "this is too complicated right now." Life circumstances, timing, things that need to be sorted before any of this can be what it would need to be. This layer is often genuinely partially true, which is what makes it so effective as a foundation for what gets built on top of it. There were real complications, real imperfect timing, real things requiring attention. And so the structure started with something that had at least partial legitimacy, which gave the whole thing a credibility that made it harder to dismantle later. The next layer came when the distance started to feel uncomfortable in a specific way, when the absence of her was producing something he had not fully anticipated. A low ache, a recurring pull, the intrusive awareness of her at specific moments in ordinary days, He needed a way to explain this that did not require him to examine what it meant. And so another layer appeared. The feeling is just attachment, just familiarity, just the way the mind fixates on what it is told it cannot have, not something real, not something that requires him to reconsider anything. Just a feeling. Feelings pass. Then the layer that said she is better off without this version of me, that the distance is a form of protection, that his absence is a gift even if it does not look like one, even if she does not experience it that way, even if he cannot quite explain why he is so certain of this. Layer by layer, he built something that allowed him to stand at a distance from the most significant connection of his life and experience himself as a person who had reasons, as a person making choices rather than a person in avoidance, as a person who was doing the difficult, responsible thing, rather than a person who was terrified of what genuine closeness with someone who actually mattered would ask of him. That structure has been doing its job, until now. There is a concept in psychology called cognitive dissonance. Loan Festinger identified it in the 1950s, and it remains one of the most precisely documented phenomena in the entire field of human psychology. Cognitive dissonance is the psychological discomfort that arises when a person holds two contradictory beliefs simultaneously, or when their beliefs come into conflict with their direct experience. The mind, Festinger discovered, cannot tolerate that contradiction indefinitely. It generates a specific uncomfortable pressure, a kind of internal static that demands resolution. And the resolution almost always happens in one of two ways. Either the person updates their belief to match their experience, or they distort their experience to protect their belief. He has been doing the second one for months, distorting his experience of the connection to protect the belief structure that says the distance is reasonable and right. Every time the ache got too loud, he turned the volume down by adding another layer to the structure. Every time she surfaced in his mind with a force that made the distance feel wrong, he ran the distortion. He reframed the feeling as something smaller than it was, reclassified it as something manageable, tucked it back under the surface of a life he was committed to reading as fine. But cognitive dissonance has a threshold. The mind can only sustain the contradiction between belief and lived experience for so long before the internal pressure exceeds the capacity of the defenses to contain it. Festinger documented this across hundreds of studies. The moment always comes, not necessarily through dramatic external events. Sometimes through the accumulation of small, ordinary moments that each carry a tiny additional weight, until one unremarkable moment tips the scale and the whole structure becomes suddenly, undeniably visible as the structure it always was. For him, something functioned as that tipping moment. It may have been something she did or did not do, something she stopped doing that his nervous system had been calibrating around without him knowing it. It may have been something completely unrelated to her, a moment in his own life that produced a feeling of genuine emptiness, and he reached internally for the thing that had always reliably produced the opposite of emptiness and found himself reaching toward her. It may have been a conversation with someone else, a moment of connection that felt thin compared to something he had been pretending was not significant. It may have been a dream. It may have been nothing he can identify. Whatever it was, something cracked the structure. And through the crack, the actual truth of what he walked away from began to come through. Here's what he is moving through right now, in the interior, in the quiet of a life that still looks the same from the outside. The recognition of what was real, not as a concept, not as something he thinks about and decides to categorize as significant, as a felt experience, as something arriving in his body in a way that bypasses the part of him that has been managing the narrative for months. The specific quality of her, not an idealized version, but the actual person. The texture of being known by her, of being in proximity to someone whose field intersects his own in a way that nothing else in his life produces. That quality is suddenly present in his experience in a way he cannot push back down. This is what Festinger's research points toward as the moment of dissonance resolution, the moment when the distortion can no longer hold and the direct experience breaks through. It is not comfortable. It is not the relief people imagine it would be. It is genuinely disorienting because the structure he built was also his orientation. It told him where he was standing, what things meant, how to understand his own choices. When it cracks, he loses his bearings. He is standing in his own interior right now without the map he has been using. And what he is finding without the map is that the territory does not match the map at all. What he told himself was reasonable distance turns out to have been fear wearing the clothes of reason. What he told himself was protecting her turns out to have been protecting himself from the specific vulnerability of being genuinely known and genuinely mattering to someone who was capable of seeing him clearly. What he told himself was clarity turns out to have been the successful suppression of information he could not afford to process while the defense structure was still operational. The information is processing now. It arrives in the form of specific memories, not general nostalgia. Specific. The particular way she looked at him at a specific moment. Something she said that landed in a way he minimized at the time because letting it land fully would have required him to be somewhere he was not ready to be. A moment when she saw something in him that no one else had seen and he felt, for a second before the defense kicked in, what it would mean to actually be seen like that by someone capable of holding what they saw without making him smaller for it. Those memories are arriving now with a weight they did not carry when he was inside the structure, because the structure filtered them, told him they were smaller than they were, told him the quality of what he had was ordinary, replaceable, not worth the cost of what staying would have required. The filter is gone now, and the memories are arriving at their actual size. This is the part that most content about twin flame reunion does not accurately describe. The realization does not immediately produce action. This is important to understand. When cognitive dissonance resolves in the direction of truth, the person who has been holding the contradicting beliefs does not immediately behave consistently with the new clarity. There is a period, sometimes a long one, of sitting with the knowing without knowing what to do with it. This happens for several reasons. The first is that the belief structure, even as it cracks, does not disappear all at once. The layers do not fall simultaneously. What happens is more like the foundation giving way while the upper floors are still standing. He now knows, at a level he cannot escape, that what he walked away from was real. But the other layers, the ones about timing, about worthiness, about whether he is capable of showing up for something this significant in the way it would require, those layers are still present, still generating their familiar objections. The knowing and the objection are now both running simultaneously, which means his dissonance has not actually resolved. It has shifted. From the dissonance of denying the connection to the dissonance of knowing the connection is real, while still being uncertain whether he can do anything about it. He has moved from one form of the contradiction to another. This is actually progress, even though it does not immediately look like it from the outside. The second reason the realization does not immediately produce action is shame. Leon Festinger's research and the decades of work that followed it consistently shows that when dissonance resolves in the direction of recognizing that your previous behavior was driven by something other than the reasons you gave yourself, the emotional residue is not just clarity. It is the specific discomfort of having to acknowledge to yourself that you were running a story, not consciously or maliciously, but the story was there, and the story cost something. Cost her something. Cost yourself something. He is not fully ready to face that directly. Not yet. But he is facing it indirectly, which is the first step. Something in him is quietly, persistently asking, "What did I do?" Not in the accusatory way of someone else asking that question from the outside. In the interior way of a person who is beginning to see his own choices with eyes that are not filtered by the story those choices were wrapped in. That question, sitting in him without an answer he can act on yet, is what you are feeling in the field. Before we go deeper, there is something practical I want to put in front of you. Because if you are in a season where the field is shifting and you can feel something moving, but you cannot fully articulate what it is, or whether you are progressing or just hoping, you need a way to document what is actually happening. Not to analyze it obsessively, to track it. to give the journey the respect of being witnessed by at least one person, and that person being you. The Twin Flame Journey Tracker and Progress Workbook does exactly that. 39 pages built specifically for this journey. An 8-stage tracker so you can see precisely where you are and watch yourself move through the stages instead of losing track of your own progress inside the fog of daily experience. A synchronicity log where you record the 1111 moments, the songs, the dreams, the specific moments of knowing, so they accumulate into evidence instead of dissolving back into doubt. A daily checklist that keeps you the center of your own story rather than organizing everything around his timeline. Weekly reflections that help you spot patterns you would miss otherwise. Monthly reviews that show your transformation in a form you can actually read. This is a working system for a real journey. It does not tell you what to think. It gives you the structure to see what you are actually living through. The link is in the description. What Leon Festinger discovered across his decades of research into cognitive dissonance is something that has profound implications for what he is moving through right now. The mind does not just experience dissonance, it works to resolve it, actively, below the level of conscious intention. There is a part of the human mind, documented across cultures and contexts in experimental conditions, that is fundamentally oriented toward internal consistency, toward having a self-image that coheres, toward being a person whose beliefs, behaviors, and values fit together into something that makes sense. And when that coherence is disrupted, when the gap between who you think you are and what you actually did becomes visible, the mind works to close the gap. He is in that process right now. What this means practically, in the context of his realization about what he pushed away, is that his mind is not just passively recognizing the truth. It is actively working to update the internal architecture that the false structure was built on. This is what psychologists call cognitive restructuring, and it is uncomfortable in a way that people who have not been through it tend to underestimate. Cognitive restructuring requires a person to look directly at choices they made from a place of fear and recognize them as fear rather than reason, to revise the story they told themselves about who they are and what they did, to sit with the specific discomfort of knowing that the version of themselves that made those choices was operating from a contracted place, a defended place, a place that was not their best self. He is a man who has probably prided himself on his clarity, on being someone who knows his own mind, on making decisions from a position of intentionality rather than reactivity. The realization that what looked like clarity was actually a defense is requiring him to revise that self-image in a way that costs him something he has held onto for a long time. This is not easy work, even when it is happening involuntarily, even when the dissonance broke through without his permission and the restructuring started before he had a chance to prepare for it. But it is happening, and the fact that it is happening means that the version of him who was capable of maintaining that structure indefinitely, of holding you at a distance forever while running the story that the distance was right, that version has become unavailable to him. The restructuring process, once started, does not stop in the middle. It moves toward resolution, toward the self-image and the behavioral reality coming back into alignment. The only question is what alignment looks like when it arrives. Here is the layer underneath the realization that is worth sitting with. He is not just dealing with the recognition that what he walked away from was real. He's dealing with what that recognition means for how he understands himself. And one of the things it means, that he is not finished sitting with yet, is that he is capable of running a story that costs someone he loves something significant, while genuinely believing, in the moment, that the story is reasonable. That is a confronting thing to discover about yourself. It does not make him a bad person. It makes him human in a specific way that most humans who have done significant psychological avoidance are eventually required to confront. But confronting it requires a willingness to sit with a version of himself that is not fully comfortable. A version who was afraid and dressed the fear up as wisdom, who left something real and called it reasonable, who created distance and called it space. The fear now is layered. There is the original fear that drove the distance, the fear of genuine intimacy, of being fully known, of what it would cost him to show up completely for something that mattered this much. That fear has not disappeared. It is still present. But now running alongside it is a new fear. The fear that he waited too long, that the window he is now recognizing as a window may have already closed, that she, having done her own interior work in the months of his absence, may have arrived at a version of herself that no longer needs what he is only now becoming ready to offer. This fear is actually productive even though it does not feel like it, because it means the stakes have become real to him in a way they were not while the structure was intact. The structure allowed him to defer the reckoning indefinitely. The collapse of the structure has ended the deferral. He is now in contact with the actual stakes of his actual situation, and the specific fear that he may have pushed away the most real thing that has ever been offered to him, and that the offer may not be available in the same form. That fear is the thing most likely to move him, not toward panic, not toward the kind of dramatic reaching that comes from anxiety rather than genuine readiness, but toward the interior work that he has been avoiding, the actual examination of what he is afraid of and whether the fear is proportionate to what is real, the actual assessment of whether the man he is right now, not the defended version, but the version sitting in the ruins of the story he built, whether that man is capable of being what this connection would require. He is asking himself that question, for the first time without the structure filtering the answer before it can fully arrive. April 15th, 2026 carries a specific energetic quality that is worth naming. The moon moves into Aries today, joining Mars and Saturn in that sign. The Aries stellium, Mars and Saturn together in the early degrees of Aries has been building pressure in the area of authentic action versus defended inaction for weeks. Mars is the impulse. Saturn is the reckoning. Together in Aries, they create the specific combination of urgency and consequence, the sense that the time for careful, indefinite deferral is ending, and that something is being asked for now. Venus is in Taurus, applying a semi-square to Mars. Venus in Taurus is extremely self-possessed. She knows her worth. She is not reaching. And the friction of her semi-square to Mars in Aries is the energetic equivalent of something worth having not being easily won. Not because she is withholding, because she is genuinely standing in herself in a way that is not organized around his timeline. Together, this configuration is describing something happening between the divine feminine and divine masculine that has the quality of a threshold, not a dramatic rupture, a quiet but real line being drawn by the cosmos. The line says the period of comfortable indefinite deferral is ending. The energy available for protecting the distance without consequence is running out. What is real is becoming harder to avoid for both of them, but especially for him. Because the restructuring that his cognitive dissonance is forcing is happening inside a month where Saturn is asking everyone to reckon with what they have been avoiding, and Mars is supplying the specific internal pressure that makes continued avoidance more costly than addressing the thing. He is feeling this, not as astrology, as a specific quality of urgency in his interior that was not present in the same way a month ago. For her, this configuration is the energy of a woman who is genuinely in herself, genuinely grounded, genuinely not organized around his arrival. Not as strategy, as the actual product of her own interior work arriving at a specific moment of embodied knowing. This is the combination that shifts things, not her performing groundedness, not her strategically withdrawing, her genuine arrival in herself meeting his genuine reckoning with what he pushed away. Those two things encountering each other in the field this week carried on a month of astrological pressure that does not allow comfortable postponement, is the specific convergence that makes this a genuine turning point, rather than another in a long series of almost movements. So, what does she do with all of this? The most important thing she does is nothing. Not the strategic nothing of someone who is performing non-attachment while waiting for a result. The genuine nothing of a person who has done her own interior work and arrived at a place where his timeline is genuinely not the organizing principle of her days. Because here is what actually creates the conditions for his cognitive restructuring to complete itself and become action rather than just interior awareness. Her not being available in the waiting mode. Her having genuinely moved on with the business of her own becoming, so completely and so authentically that the version of her he is now reckoning with having pushed away is not the version that was organized around his return. It is the version that stopped being organized around his return and became organized around herself. That version of her is the thing he cannot construct a defense against. The defense structure he built was, in part, built around a specific version of her. The version who was reaching, who was organized around closing the distance, whose urgency, however loving, gave his avoidance a target and a function. When the reaching stopped, the defense lost its logic, and the self he was protecting started to look, without the pressure of her pursuit, not like a self that was making careful decisions, like a self that was standing in an empty room holding a position no one was challenging anymore. That realization is part of what cracked the structure. So what she does now is continue building the life she started building when the reaching stopped. Continue developing the interior architecture that this journey demanded and that she has been laying down, quietly, in the months of his distance. Continue becoming the version of herself that does not need him to confirm that she is real or that what existed between them was real, or that the work she has been doing is actually moving somewhere. She continues, and in the continuing, she becomes more fully herself. And the version of herself she is becoming is exactly the version that his realization, once it finishes moving through him and becomes something he is ready to act from, is going to find standing in her own life, genuinely whole, genuinely present, genuinely not waiting. That is not the ending of the connection. That is the beginning of what the connection was always supposed to be. Not two people reaching toward each other across a distance that one of them manufactured. Two people who each, separately, did the work of becoming someone capable of the connection without losing themselves inside it. Who meet not from the longing that has been running the dynamic for months, but from the solidity of people who have faced themselves honestly and arrived somewhere real. His realization is one half of that arrival. Her continuing is the other. April is holding both of them, in the specific pressure of a month that does not allow continued comfortable distance from what is true. For him, the truth that what he pushed away was real and that the story he built to justify it was a story. For her, the truth that she has done enough work to be genuinely whole without the resolution, and that the wholeness is not the consolation prize. It is the thing the journey was building toward all along. The cognitive dissonance that cracked open inside him this week is not a small thing. It is the beginning of the end of the version of him that was capable of the distance. And the end of that version is the beginning of the one who can come back to her, not from fear or from longing or from the desperation of someone who has lost his bearings, but from the interior clarity of a man who looked directly at what he pushed away, felt the full weight of it, did the work of dismantling the story he told himself, and arrived slowly and without fanfare at the person he was always going to have to become before this connection could be what it was always meant to be. That man is in there. He has always been in there. The distance was never evidence of his absence. It was evidence of the specific thing the journey was asking him to face, which is that he could not come back as the version of himself that left. The version that left was defended. The version that left had a story. The version that left could not hold what this connection actually was without the story giving way and the fear underneath it becoming visible. That version cannot come back. It has already started dissolving. What is being built in its place, through the specific discomfort of a man in genuine cognitive restructuring, is the version that can. He is finding his way through, and she does not need to guide him through it. She does not need to wait at the door for him to arrive. She only needs to be where she is, genuinely, without performance, without strategy, without organizing herself around his timeline. She only needs to keep becoming herself. That is the most powerful thing she can do. Not because it will make him hurry, because it is the truth of where she actually is, and the truth of where she actually is, meeting the truth of what he is finally reckoning with, is the only thing that has ever been able to close this particular distance. Not performance, not waiting. Truth meeting truth across a field that has always been carrying more information than either of them has known how to read. That is what this week is. That is what this realization inside him means. And that is what she is, right now, whether she knows it or not. The thing he finally could not pretend was not real.